You were taught the worst crimes in history, just not this one. On the 13th of December 1937, the capital of China, Nanking, fell to Japanese forces. Estimates suggest 200,000 to 300,000 people were murdered, tortured, and erased. The world called it the Rape of Nanking, but most have never heard the full story. Witnesses recorded it, evidence survived, photographs existed, diaries were written, yet the world moved on in silence. If you've never heard of the Nanking Massacre, that absence was never accidental. Subscribe and support Dark Decoded X, where we bring you 2 deep investigations every single week. Share your city or country, where you're watching from, in the comments. Seeing our growing community from around the world always brings us purpose. Now, let the investigation begin. December 13th, 1937, the day Mercy died. December 13th, 1937, 2 p.m. Japanese forces broke through Nanking's walls after weeks of brutal siege. The Chinese army collapsed in hours. Soldiers abandoned their posts, stripping off uniforms and disappearing into panicked crowds. Civilians had nowhere to run. The Yangtze River blocked escape routes to the west, trapping 600,000 people inside a death trap. Japanese commanders gave orders that would define the Sino-Japanese War secret history. No prisoners, no mercy, no survivors. What followed wasn't combat. It was systematic annihilation. Soldiers went door to door, dragging men into streets for mass executions. Women were pulled from homes, raped repeatedly in front of their families, then bayoneted. Children weren't spared. Infants were thrown against walls, and toddlers were used for target practice. The Imperial Japanese Army atrocities began with organized brutality. Execution pits were dug in advance. Killing competitions between officers were documented in Japanese newspapers like sporting events. Bodies were piled so high they blocked entire streets. The Yangtze turned crimson, corpses floating downstream for miles, and this nightmare was only beginning. A Nazi became their last hope, and history erased him. December 14th, 1937. While foreigners fled Nanking, John Rabe stayed. He was a German businessman, a Nazi Party member, and the most unlikely hero in modern history. When the massacre began, Rabe did something extraordinary. He established the Nanjing Safety Zone Mystery, a 2-square-mile refuge marked with Nazi flags, betting Japanese forces would respect Germany's alliance. He was right. The swastika flags worked like shields. Rabe sheltered over 250,000 refugees in schools, hospitals, warehouses, and his own garden. He documented everything in the John Rabe diaries, detailed accounts of rapes, murders, and mutilations witnessed daily. He filmed atrocities on a 16mm camera, capturing evidence he knew the world would deny. He wrote desperate letters to Japanese commanders, demanding they stop the slaughter. They laughed in his face. Soldiers broke into the safety zone every night, dragging women away while Rabe physically blocked troops using his Nazi armband as protection. He saved thousands of lives through sheer defiance. But when he returned to Germany in 1938 with his evidence, the Gestapo confiscated everything, silencing the only witness the West might have believed. They weaponized rape, then called it military strategy. December 15th to 25th, 1937. The Rape of Nanking wasn't random violence. It was weaponized sexual terror designed to break an entire civilization. Japanese soldiers established comfort stations where women and girls were imprisoned and raped systematically, 20 to 40 times daily. Girls as young as 9 were abducted from streets, dragged from hiding places, and pulled from their mothers' arms. Officers organized rape competitions, keeping score like a game. Soldiers photographed their crimes as trophies, grinning beside their victims' mutilated bodies. Pregnant women were bayoneted through their stomachs. Survivors were often killed immediately to eliminate witnesses. Those who lived carried scars both visible and invisible for the rest of their shortened lives. The war crimes in China evidence includes testimonies from women who escaped, their bodies permanently destroyed by the violence. Some were deliberately infected with venereal diseases as part of biological warfare experiments. The Unit 731 connection reveals this wasn't isolated barbarity, it was coordinated dehumanization. Soldiers were told Chinese people weren't human. They believed it, and they acted accordingly, turning an ancient capital into a breeding ground for every imaginable atrocity. Murder became entertainment. Newspapers printed the scores. December 1937. Two Japanese officers, Second Lieutenants Toshiaki Mukai and Tsuyoshi Noda, turned genocide into sport. They competed to see who could kill 100 people first, using only a sword. Japanese newspapers ran daily updates like sports coverage. Incredible record, Mukai 106, Noda 105. Which will be the first to reach 150? The contest continued. When they couldn't determine who reached 100 first, they started over, raising the target to 150. This wasn't hidden in military reports. It was celebrated in Tokyo newspapers, framed as heroic feats of samurai spirit. The Imperial Japanese Army atrocities were documented by Japan's own press and turned into propaganda that glorified slaughter. Soldiers posed for photographs next to decapitated bodies, smiling for cameras. Bayonet practice was conducted on live prisoners tied to posts, their screams echoing through occupied streets. Children were tossed in the air and caught on blades like a twisted circus act. Mass burials were conducted with victims still breathing, buried alive under mountains of corpses. Witnesses described rivers so clogged with bodies that soldiers built bridges from them to cross. The Qinhuai River became a mass grave stretching for miles. And in Tokyo, the newspapers called it victory. They burned 300,000 bodies, but couldn't burn the truth. January to February 1938. After 6 weeks of slaughter, Japanese forces attempted to erase all evidence. Mass graves were exhumed and bodies burnt in massive cremation pits. Documents were destroyed, witnesses were hunted down and executed. Entire neighborhoods were torched to eliminate crime scenes. But they couldn't eliminate everything. The John Rabe diaries survived, hidden and smuggled out through diplomatic channels. Reverend John Rabe filmed 105 minutes of footage showing atrocities, bodies stacked in streets, wounded civilians with horrific injuries, and testimonies from shell-shocked survivors. American and European missionaries documented thousands of individual cases in sworn affidavits, creating an archive of horrors. The Nanjing safety zone mystery preserved records that would have otherwise vanished into ash. Chinese survivors carved testimonies into walls, buried photographs in sealed containers, memorized the names of the dead to preserve them for future generations. When the Tokyo war crimes trials began in 1946, the war crimes in China, evidence emerged from its hiding places. Over 2,000 witness testimonies, hundreds of photographs taken by Japanese soldiers themselves, film reels showing executions, but Japan's post-war government systematically denied, minimized, and buried every finding. The cover-up became as organized and deliberate as the original crime. Nanking was just the beginning. The real horror came later. 1937 to 1945. The Unit 731 connection reveals Nanking wasn't an isolated explosion of violence. It was part of a systematic, state-sponsored program of dehumanization that spanned the entire Pacific War. Unit 731. Japan's Biological Warfare Division, headquartered in Harbin, conducted experiments on living Chinese prisoners that defied human comprehension. Vivisections without anesthesia. Plague infections were tested on bound subjects. Frostbite experiments where limbs were frozen, then thawed, then amputated. Pressure chamber torture until eyes popped from skulls. At least 10,000 people, men, women, and children, died screaming in Unit 731's laboratories, their bodies dissected while their hearts still beat. The same Imperial Japanese Army units involved in the Nanking Massacre supplied test subjects, to Unit 731's facilities. The mindset was identical. Chinese lives had no value beyond what could be learned from their suffering. After the war, the United States granted full immunity to Unit 731 scientists in exchange for their research data, ensuring their crimes went completely unpunished. The Forgotten Holocaust of China wasn't just forgotten. It was deliberately suppressed by post-war powers who wanted Japan as an ally against Soviet communism. Justice was traded for geopolitics, and the victims vanished into classified files that remained sealed for over 50 years. They lived through hell, then spent decades being called liars. 1938 to 2025. Survivors of the Nanking Massacre of 1937 spent the rest of their lives demanding acknowledgement from a world that didn't want to hear them. Women who endured systematic gang rape testified in international forums, facing disbelief, shame, and accusations of exaggeration. Families who lost entire bloodlines kept handwritten lists of the dead, refusing to let their names disappear into historical silence. The untold stories of Nanking emerged slowly, painfully, over decades. Oral histories were recorded. Memorials were built from survivor donations. Evidence was compiled in archives that governments tried to keep closed, but Japan's government fought back viciously. Textbooks were rewritten to minimize or erase the massacre entirely. Politicians publicly called it exaggerated propaganda and Chinese lies. Survivors were accused of fabricating atrocities for political gain. Some received death threats for speaking publicly. The Sino-Japanese War secret history became a battlefield of memory itself, fought not with weapons, but with textbooks, lawsuits, and diplomatic pressure. Chinese survivors aged and died, many never receiving an apology, compensation, or official recognition. But they ensured the next generation would know. Museums were built, archives were opened, documentary evidence was digitized and preserved, and the truth, however delayed, however contested, remained undeniable. The dead couldn't speak, but the survivors refused to stop screaming. The West knew everything and chose silence. 1945 to 2025. The Forgotten Holocaust of China was forgotten by design, not by accident. Cold War politics prioritized Japan as America's crucial Pacific ally against communism. War crime prosecutions at the Tokyo trials were minimal compared to Nuremberg. Most perpetrators lived free, some rising to become post-war political leaders and corporate executives. International media focused obsessively on European atrocities while ignoring Asian suffering. The Rape of Nanking was mentioned briefly at the Tokyo trials, then buried under diplomatic silence and destroyed by Cold War priorities. Western textbooks barely mentioned it for decades. In Japan, it was systematically erased from educational materials. For generations, Nanking existed only in Chinese memory, dismissed as communist propaganda, minimized as wartime exaggeration, and denied by successive Japanese governments. The war crimes in China evidence sat untranslated in archives, gathering dust while the perpetrators died of old age in comfort and honor. Japan's government continues today to dispute casualty numbers, remove references from textbooks, and honor convicted war criminals at Yasukuni Shrine. Prime ministers visit the shrine publicly, enraging survivors and their descendants. The debate isn't about what happened. Every credible historian agrees on the facts. It's about who gets to control the narrative. And for 88 years, the victims have been losing that fight. If this investigation has opened your eyes, please subscribe, hit the bell, share widely, and watch the next documentaries pinned on the end screen. Over 300,000 people were murdered in 6 weeks. Their screams echoed across a river choked with bodies, and the world called it ancient history. But forgetting isn't neutral, it's complicity. When we let atrocities fade, we permit them to return. So here's the question: what are we forgetting right now?